So now the question becomes, and again, both their executions occurred in Rome, so just like with Peter and Paul, it would have been researchable through government records. Ignatius and Polycarp weren't witnesses of the resurrection of Jesus, but they were witnesses to the apostles' faith. Okay, and the apostles' teaching regarding Jesus. All right, so Peter and Paul were martyred for their faith, and their faith in this resurrection of Jesus. Paul tells us that it was an audio-video thing, and this whole appearance of Jesus is the basis for why he's willing to die. We have this oral tradition that we get through Paul, but it's actually older than Paul, that says that like Jesus did these group appearances. Okay. And then the apostles in general endured violent persecution. Remember, Polycarp wrote that to the Philippians. He's like, y'all saw how Paul was willing to go through that, and Peter and the other apostles. And he says they were willing to do so for their imitation of Christ. So, I mean, the reference, I forget if it's Ignatius or Polycarp, they say, you know, I think it's Ignatius there. He's saying that like Jesus appeared to Peter and the others with him. So like, and he gets his information from John, okay? So like, that gives us, you know, at the very minimum, Peter and two other people who experienced this multimodal hallucination in addition to Paul. So that's 4 people. Okay, but like, what's most likely is that they're referencing this appearance to the 12 that the oral tradition talks about and that the Gospels talk about. So like, you've got more than 4 people, okay? Alright, so, and we're not even talking about James yet, because we got to add James in here. Alright, but let's just look at the odds. Okay, let's start doing some math here. So let's just say we have 4 multimodal hallucinations or audio-video appearances of Jesus. You've got a 0.8% chance of that occurring. Okay, so how do we calculate odds when we have more than one event that we're looking at? Okay, so 0.8% chance of that occurring. Well, what that means is that if you were to pick a person randomly out of the population, there would be a 0.8% chance that that person would experience a multimodal hallucination at some point in his life or her life. Okay, so it's rare, but it's not super duper rare. It's a little bit less than 1%. So it's a little bit less than 1 out of 100 people. Okay, but like, what if you pick 2 people at random? What are the odds that both of them will have that multimodal hallucination? Or what if you randomly pick 4 people? What are the odds that all 4 of those people that you pick randomly will have multimodal hallucinations? Well, the way that's calculated is you actually multiply these numbers together. So I'll try to give you, this in probability is called the basic rule of counting. So like, let's say that you've got a lotto, the easiest Mega Millions lotto ever, and there's like 4 ping pong balls thingies that come up, and there's only 2 ping pong balls in each thingy, and there's 4 thingies, so there's 4 slots, and there's 2. It's either a 1 or a 2 in each one. So what are the odds that 1 2 1 2 will come up? Well, 1 2 1 2 is one possible outcome out of how many possible outcomes? Okay, so you could have 1 in the first one, and then you could have 2. Right? Well, let's make it even simpler. Instead of having 1 2 1 2, let's make it incredibly simple. Let's just say there's 2 slots. This will make the math even easier. Let's just say there's 2 slots. Okay? What are the odds that the outcome will be 1 2? Okay, well, for the first one it could be 1, and then it could be 1 1, it could be 1 2, or the first digit could be 2, and it could be 2 2 or 2 1. Okay, so there's 4 possible outcomes, and 1 2 is 1 out of 4 possible outcomes, so there's a 1 in 4 chance, or a 25% chance, or a 0.25, 0.25. Okay, so if you notice what's going on there is like, how many possibilities are there for the first one? 2. And how many are there for the second one? 2. If you multiply 2 times 2, you get 4, which is how many total possible outcomes there are. That's the basic rule of counting. So like, you multiply the possible outcomes times the possible outcomes. And I won't go into any more detail about that because it, probably make this video run longer. But like, basically, if you've got a 0.8% chance, then what you're saying is like, well, let's just say you got a 1% chance, then like it's 1 out of 100 times 1 out of 100. All right. So for 4 people, it'd be 1 out of 100 times 1 out of 100 times 1 out of 100 times 1 out of 100. And so the numerator is 1, and the denominator is like 1 with, what is that, 8 zeros after it. Okay. So that's 1 in 10 billion. Okay. So well, I think I might have done that. I'm doing math. I got the math. I don't want to do math in my head and get it wrong. But like, you get the point. Okay, so 4 multimodal hallucinations here, because Peter and those who are with him, at minimum 2, you're looking at 0.8 times 0.8 times 0.8 times 0.8. Okay, what we're saying is like, if you were to pick a person out at random out of the population, what are the odds that that person will have a multimodal hallucination at any time in his life? 0.8%. Or 8/10 of 1%. All right, or 80% of 1%. All right. So if you were to pick a person out at random again, what are the odds that that person would have one too? Well, what are the odds that both of them will have one? It'd be 0.8 times 0.8, okay? Or 0.8% times 0.8%. Sorry, or 0.8% is actually 0.008. So you multiply 0.008 times itself, and you reduce the fraction, you're going to get that, let's do the math again just to make sure I didn't goof anything. So 0.008 times 0.008 times 0.008. Alright, and you get, alright, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 4 out of a million odds. Okay, so, alright, so 4 out of a million is 1 in 125,000 odds. Okay, if we add in like one more person though, which is most likely that it's more than just those 4, then we multiply times 0.008. All right, now we're looking at 3 out of a 1 with 8 zeros after it, which is whatever that is. 10 million. No, 100 million. Okay. If we do it again, 6 people. I hate the way this thing works. Alright, so we're going to do 0.008 raised to the 6th power. Okay, now it's 1 out of a 10 with like 15 zeros after it. So that's like whatever comes after a trillion odds. Again, it's just unlikely that you'll pick one out and then you'll pick that one out again, and you'll pick that one out again. So like, and again, we can add another one in that we have good evidence for. Jesus' brother James. We need to talk about Jesus' brother James. We didn't talk about him in the video on what the apostles really believed, and I'm feeling bad about it. I was just talking about it. Okay, so James. Okay, so we'll talk about James in a minute when we get to shared delusion theory. Okay, we gotta talk about that. But anyway, you see what I mean? Like the odds are low. All right, so just like where I get some of these numbers, like I got it from Craig Fowler, MD, professor and chair of surgery at Campbell University School of Osteopathic Medicine. He received both Best Doctor in America and U.S. Top Ophthalmology Awards. He talks about hypnagogic, hypnopompic, multimodal, and middle-aged and bereavement hallucinations. So, anyway, hypnagogic is like a really common hallucination that 37% of people will experience that at some point in their life. And that is when you're falling asleep. Hypnopompic is when you're waking up, 12.5%. Multimodal, 0.8% in middle-aged people, okay? And bereavement, he's got 13 to 16% of people have bereavement hallucinations. I don't know exactly. Anyway, even if we say just visual and we give it that 7% odds, then like we say 7%, okay, you know, like we give it that bereavement, like in other words, like the problem is like, what if we improve the odds, you know, and like say, okay, bereavement hallucinations, 7% of bereaved have bereavement hallucinations. All right, so like let's do it, bereavement hallucinations. So that would be 0.7. How many people are we talking about? Paul and the 4, so like 5. Let's see what we get. Okay, so all right. So 0.07 raised to the 5th power, and we get like, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like 2 out of a million or 1 out of 500,000. You know, but then realistically it's more, so like, you know, times 0.07 another time, and now we're already into 1 in 10 million, you know, and you can see how it goes up from there. So like, even if we bump it up to 7%, it's the issue that it's unlikely that you're going to do it again and do it again and do it again and do it again, you know. Like, so that's the issue. We'll look at the combo theories, because if your mind is like mine, you're immediately thinking like, okay, what if there's some way to get out of this by just having like 1 or 2 of them hallucinate? That's what Gerd Ludemann does. Like, he just like, he has Peter and Paul hallucinating, and then everyone else is, I think, deluded. John Dominic Crossan just has just Paul, you know, and I think it's Mulder, the historian Mulder, has like just Peter, I think. Okay, so the odds are really low for hallucination theory. What you need to make hallucination theory work is like some evidence for it. Like, so if you're just picking people out at random in the population, then the odds are really low. But like, what if you say like, okay, what if we have evidence that all of these people used hallucinogenic drugs all the time? You know, they were mushroom eaters, okay, or something. You know, psilocybin was their thing. Okay, if there's evidence for that, that would totally change the game, right? So like, the example William Lane Craig uses is like, you know, Bill is a college student. 90% of college students drink. What are the odds that Bill drinks beer? 90%, right? But we also add in additional information that Bill goes to Wheaton College that has a strict no alcohol policy, and he's the president of the Baptist Collegiate Ministries. Okay. Now what are the odds that Bill drinks? They're going to have to change. In fact, they're probably less than 50% now. So, or like, you can think of it this way. You know, you buy a lotto ticket. What are the odds that come Friday that lotto ticket will win the lotto? It's like 1 in 27 billion. It's really low. But that means that when somebody wins the lotto, that a lot of people bought tickets that week. A lot of people bought a lot of tickets that week. Okay. Or something incredibly unlikely happened, which would be rare, but could happen sometimes. Okay. I'm sure one person bought a ticket and won. Okay. But like, how do I put it? what if they announce on Friday that the winning numbers are the same numbers as the ones on your ticket? Well, in that instance, you would have to change your probability assessment, right? Like, it can't be 1 in 27 billion or whatever it is, like super low. I think it's 1 in 27 billion. Like, because like you could say like, if those numbers aren't the right numbers, then what are the odds, if they were going to report fake numbers, what are the odds that they would report the exact numbers on my thing? Not very good. Like, so if there's evidence to support the theory, what we're talking about is prior probability and then probability based on the evidence. And the probability based on the evidence can outweigh the prior probability. So the prior probability for hallucination theory is horrible. Like, of course it's not true. But if you have some supporting evidence, then that's a total game changer. So people look for the evidence. The problem is they don't find any. I'll give you two ways that people go about it. There's the Joe Rogan version. Like, I've seen Joe Rogan talking about this, that like the Eucharist, the Lord's Supper, the communion wine that they had with Jesus before his crucifixion. There was a mold on the bread or in the wine that was hallucinogenic. They were taking hallucinogenic drugs. Okay. Well, there's a few problems with that. First of all, people that are on hallucinogenic drugs typically are aware it's a hallucination. And you have to get like high doses that don't kill you to like, for it to be so convincing that you think it's real. Okay. So it just doesn't fit the profile, especially of like first time users. Like on LSD, people typically have to close their eyes to see the hallucinations. But not always. Okay. In this case, absence of evidence is evidence of absence. So like I'll give the example of what I mean. If I was to tell you that there's 100 mosquitoes in the front yard, how could you tell if I was right? Well, you could walk out there and look around for 30 seconds and say, there's not 100 mosquitoes out here. Well, that wouldn't really, the absence of evidence in that case wouldn't prove evidence of the absence of the 100 mosquitoes. Because the mosquitoes are small and you wouldn't expect to see evidence of them. But let's say I told you there were 100 rhinos. Okay, 10 seconds of looking in the front yard for 100 rhinos and you would be able to determine whether or not there are 100 rhinos. So like, when we look at absence of evidence, or what we say in history, the historical records are silent on this. There's an absence of evidence for this. There's no evidence for this, for the Eucharist being hallucinogenic. Is this a rhino situation or a mosquito situation? It seems like a rhino situation, because wouldn't that be a big deal to talk about? That it's this magic, sacred, special food that they drink and then they see things? They eat the bread and they see things. Like, when did it stop being hallucinogenic? Wasn't that been a big debate? You're not going to take the sacred bread anymore? Wouldn't it have been a big deal? It would be a major part of the stories, and they would have continued to have hallucinations. They would have been considered magic bread and wine. Now, I think what Joe Rogan's trying to say is like, well, because it was a sacred meal, that meant it was hallucinogenic. But that, as the old saying goes, that bat swings both ways. That sword that's a double-edged sword. Or what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. Okay, come on, man. That's also like the Jews take. It's also a Passover Seder. There are plenty of sacred meals throughout all of human history that were not hallucinogenic. Okay? Like, every ancient temple sacrifice to the gods, typically the priests would eat it. Okay, so it was regular food. And it was usually regular food because they thought the gods wanted the food. Okay, so different groups ate regular meals because food is sacred, food is special, food is essential to life, and it doesn't have to make you hallucinate for it to be important to you. Okay, so if it's sauce for the goose, it's sauce for the gander. Like, if it's evidence for A and B, then it's not evidence for A over and above B. There's no evidence for A. Because if the evidence, the fact that they called it sacred fits just as well with theory B, then there's no evidence for theory A in this case. All right, so another problem is that Easter is on Sunday and the Passover is on Thursday, so they took away. Was this a flashback? Okay, or you could say that they accidentally took the drugs just that one time and never made the same mistake ever again. Which, given what we've been saying about probabilities, that seems absurd.